So yesterday, we discussed the 3 English constitutions, okay? And I just wanted to do a quick overview of that right now. And just, some of the things we see that are important with the English tradition. Obviously, those rights that we identified in the documents are important. Now, when it comes to your essay for this test, I'm not expecting you to list all of those rights for each one of these documents, okay? That's just going to get too bogged down, okay? So do you want to mention some of the rights? Yes. Do you need to list them all? Am I going to count off for not having all the rights listed? No, okay? Now, what you want to have, when you're doing a general overview here is, for the first time, we see with the Magna Carta, that's the reason why we still talk about it, guys, is that we go from an absolute monarch to placing limits on government, okay, under divine right rule. And that's the real importance of the Magna Carta, okay? And then as you move through with these other constitutions, you start to get representative government, okay? So you start with the hands, all the power in the hands of one person, and by the time you get to the English Bill of Rights, the actual House of Commons starts to take more power, which they are representatives of the common folk, the people, okay? So that's what we're looking at in this transition over 500 years as we get into the 1770s, 1760s and 70s today, okay? The other day we did the colonies, okay? So we started in 1607, 1620, and then you move to where we have 13 colonies, 3 different types of colonies, the royal, the proprietary, and the independent colonies. And obviously it's those independent colonies where the rebellion will really begin, because they were the ones with the most amount of self-rule, even though in the royal and proprietary colonies, the people, especially the property owners, had a say, okay? Other traditions we get from the English are the layers of government. We've been talking about this since day one. You've got your national government, your regional governments, and then your local governments. We take that from the British. The political jargon that we use oftentimes is we get from the English. Things like terms like sheriff, terms like coroner. You guys know what a coroner is? Okay, these are terms that we get from the British. And of course, what am I speaking right now? I'm speaking English. Okay, so the language we use, the common law, all these sorts of things we get from the British. Okay, so the English got to learn through history about government, and we are the beneficiaries of that. Okay, so that takes us to our next topic, which is a brief review of revolutionary history. A brief review of revolutionary history. Tomorrow, I will wrap this up, okay? Friday, I will not be here. You're going to have a funky schedule with the pastor's day. So I think this class is like 40 minutes, okay? There's a video I'm going to have the sub show. That is a video you want to watch. Okay, in fact, you may even want to take down some notes. Basically, what the video is, it's from a series that the History Channel did called The Founding Fathers. It's a 4-set series. We're going to watch episode 1, which is called Rebels with a Cause. So what it's going to do is reinforce what I'm teaching about today and tomorrow. It's going to go back through that with you, maybe better than I did. It's a good video. If you're, doing a video over something that took place over, 250 years ago, they do a really nice job with it. Okay. So that'll be Friday, and what we don't finish on Friday, I'll have the sub write down where you left off. We'll finish the video on Monday, and then I want to show you a little bit of John Adams from that series, which is really well done. So maybe a day of that or 2, and so then we'll start prepping for the test. Okay, I would like to do the essay test next Wednesday, because that's our long day. Okay, essay text next Wednesday. That's what we're talking about right now is the essay. Everybody with me? Okay. And then we can do the objective test on Thursday. That's okay. All right. So that's kind of the plan. All right. So a brief review of Revolutionary history. And what we're going to start with, guys, is this 1607 to 1761. Okay, this is what is known as the era of salutary neglect. So from Jamestown, okay, until the end of the French and Indian War, 1761, basically the king and parliament later on left us to our own devices. I talked about the other day. They couldn't micromanage the colonies from an ocean away. All right, so it was known as an era of salutary neglect. You guys know what neglect is, right? Okay, so this is just a historical label for that time period. Okay, we were left alone by England, and we liked it. Okay, and the thing you got to remember is, you know, you're starting to have generations and generations of Americans being born here, growing up and living under colonial rule, not necessarily British rule, if that makes sense. Okay, so there's a lot of self-governance, especially in those independent colonies. Okay, we create our own institutions, we created our own governments. Now, I want to mention on the eve of the French and Indian War, 1754, okay, that's the dates of the French and Indian War. But in 1754, Ben Franklin, on the eve of this war, tried to unite the colonies. There were 13 independent colonies, right? He tried to unite them. Any guys remember the name of this plan that Franklin put together? Wow. I'll take that as a no. Okay. This was called the Albany Plan of Union. Does that ring a bell? No. Now, when you're taking 13 separate colonies, and you're trying to bring them together in 1754, what's the main purpose of bringing these colonies together? Any idea on that? Yeah, defense, security. Okay. Now, when you start trying to do this, and there's a reason I'm talking about this, guys, okay? When you start trying to unite 13 colonies, one of the first questions you're going to ask is like, okay, who's going to be in charge? Is it going to be somebody from New York that's going to be in charge? Is it going to be from somebody from South Carolina that's in charge? Who's going to be in charge? You know what I mean? And so when you start talking about that, people are like, no, thank you. We like being in charge of our own situation. Okay, how do you think the Crown and the Parliament felt about this? 13 together is stronger than 13 separate, correct? So they don't like this either. But the discussions that went into this plan by Franklin, though, really set the stage coming up for unifying the 13 later on, okay? So it's kind of it's like a test run at this, okay? So it's worth mentioning. And also with the 13, they actually, Franklin was going to include the Iroquois Nation, okay, which is probably the fiercest, most powerful Native American tribe at the time, the Iroquois, okay. So that's interesting to mention. All right, so in 1761, as this war is coming to an end, the French and Indian War, right? Guys, this was immensely expensive, okay, for the British. This is a world war. This is being fought in Europe. It's being fought in the New World. And so the British sent over 20,000 regular troops over to the colonies to help fight this war. And it was expensive. So remember the definition of mercantilism? Okay, so this is where the British really start to clamp down on mercantilism. Okay, and one of the things they're going to ask us to do is buy more British goods and pay more in taxes, or pay taxes to begin with, okay, to cover the cost of protecting the Americans from the French and the Indians, okay? And that first tax that they imposed, of course, is called what? Lily, are you taking notes? Don't get smart with me. See the text from your mother? Huh?
Do I need to check my phone?
No, you don't need to. Now I got water. Oh, it's over there. Okay. The Stamp Act, which is a tax on what? Paper goods.
Anything that has stamps. Legal documents.
Anything that was printed. Okay, all printed materials. So yes, paper with print on it. Okay, so that could be a newspaper. That could be playing cards. Could be contracts. And so forth. Okay. Now, how did the colonists respond to this? Not there before. What?
We're not a fan.
They were not happy. Okay. Now, they're going to have something called the Stamp Act Congress. Okay. The Stamp Act Congress. And one of the leaders of this Congress, a guy named John Adams, he is going to write to the British the Declaration of Rights and Grievances. Yeah. And in this, the text of this Declaration of Rights and Grievances, he will utter these words. Stop it. No taxation now I'm going to tell you guys a secret because it's kind of unfair. She has a little bit of an unfair advantage. When Lily was little, like 6, 7, when I was grading these essays, she used to read them.
Like I knew what I was reading.
You were reading them. She's a nerd, okay? So she was reading these literally at the age of 7. So
I couldn't even read it.
It's better than mine.
it has. So that's why she's able to recall a lot of this stuff, okay? All right. So, did it work? Did they repeal the Stamp Act?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. But did they still want money?
Yes.
Now I want you to think about this from the British perspective. Now, these are English colonies, British colonies, and they send all these troops over here to protect them, defend them, for George Washington's screw up out in the Ohio Valley, starting this war with the French, and bails us out. Is it too much to ask that the colonists chip in a little bit for that? It is too much to ask. Without representation, right? So if the British would have given us, each colony, say, 2 members of the House of Commons that could go to London and serve in the House of Commons, we may still be British today if we were given representation. But we weren't. You understand? And that's based on principle. That's based on this. Okay? They know their rights. Okay? Yes, you with me?
Yes.
So they're ticked. Yes. See, yeah. Well, I think that's a good question. I think one of the reasons you would see this is Americans were seen as more of subjects, right? Or lower class citizens than those born in England. You know what I mean?
The hillbillies out of the colony.
Yeah, and we don't like that. You know what I mean? And George Washington really had to deal with that his whole life. Okay? He was born in America. And he served with the British in some couple of these different wars. I mean, like, he worked right alongside British generals. But he was never allowed to become an officer because he wasn't born in England. Okay? And that just grated on Washington. Okay? It really did. And so, I mean, that's going to cost the British eventually. I mean, we don't tend to think of Washington as a great general so much as a great leader. You can, okay. So, as these new taxes, can you think of any of the new like taxes they put on, like tea tax? Sugar. We were making the cotton. Okay. Now, the British wanted us to buy their stuff. Now, they would get the sugar from down in the Caribbean, where the British had colonies down there too, and they'd ship it up to us. You got to buy our stuff. You got to buy our stuff. As they would, I forget who was quoted, maybe it was Sam Adams, who said, we have to drink that foul brew of tea that the British sent us. Okay. They didn't like having to do it. Okay. And so, there came this group of guys, okay, that got together and started writing letters to members of Parliament, to the King, and otherwise. It was a group called the Committees of DNC.
I think so.
There's an M in there too. Correspond. Ents. A. A.
ER's wrong.
We know what you're trying to say.
Committees of Correspondence. CORRESPONDENCE. Let me give you some of the names of this group of men. A guy named John Hancock. John Adams. His cousin, his older cousin, Sam Adams, Benjamin Franklin, a guy named Thomas Paine, P-A-I-N-E, Paine, and a young lawyer named Alexander Hamilton. Now, these men live in different cities, different places, okay? Franklin's from Philadelphia, right? The Adams brothers or cousins are from Boston. Hamilton's from New York. Hancock's from Boston, okay? So they're from different parts of the country, but this committees of correspondence, they write letters. They keep the spirit alive of resistance to these taxes, okay? And eventually they will become a little bit more radicalized than writing letters. And they will morph into this group called
Got mad at me once.
Sons of Liberty.
Thank you. Okay, so those are kind of your founding members of the Sons of Liberty. Now, John Adams is not part of this yet. As far as once they start getting radical, John Adams is not for this. Okay, he's for the law. Adams is about the law. Okay, and under his view, the British Constitution protects their rights. You understand? So all Adams wants, John Adams wants, is look, we need our rights reinstated. Okay? Well, tensions begin to rise, especially in these independent colonies. And in 1770, a major incident takes place in Boston. Now, by this time, guys, the British have troops. They've left them in the country, in the colonies. And especially the port cities, because you know the Royal Navy, you know, they need ports for their ships, right? Boston has a big harbor, New York has a big harbor, New York City anyways, and so forth. And Boston became a hotbed for resistance to the British Crown. And so, as British troops were at their post, they were often mocked, belittled, called things like lobster backs because of their red coats. Okay? And on this fateful night, a mob formed and began throwing things at the British soldiers. Snowballs and such. But inside the snowballs were oyster shells. You guys know oyster shells? Okay. In coastal cities, a lot of times, just like some of our country roads, they'll take, broken up concrete and, use it as a surface to drive on. You know what I mean? So they would take oyster shells and put them in the streets because there's no concrete roads yet. You know what I mean? So when it rains, it gets muddy. If you have oyster shells down, then your horses have traction, the wheels, can roll on the oyster shells. So they were plentiful in the snow, picking up those with shells and throwing them at soldiers. And then they actually started throwing clubs at them. And one of them got hit. And he fired. And the mob was really instigating this. They wanted them to fight. They wanted an excuse to go to war with Britain. These are rabble-rousers. These are troublemakers, okay? And in the end, 5 people will be shot dead. believe it's 9 people are shot all told. Okay. Little trivia here, right? One of the 5 that was killed was a runaway slave. Remember his name? Yeah, Crispus Attucks. Okay. Or Attucks, Crispus Attucks. Okay. Now, can any of you guys picture in your head the painting of the Boston Massacre that's pretty much in every textbook ever? Okay, you can? Oh, it's in every textbook. I know it's in there. I haven't looked, but I know it's in there.
Mr. Ferris had it on his board for like a whole week.
Yeah, well, I had a baseball with it on it that somebody brought me, but I didn't. There it's at home. I used it for a project and didn't bring it back. All right, what chapter would that be? There's the founders. There's George Washington. We're going to show Ruby this picture. There's Thomas Paine. Voila. You guys seen that, right?
Yes, that's the one made by Paul Revere.
By Paul Revere. Thank you. Okay, so Paul Revere. What's so funny? Paul Revere. Creates this lithograph. Okay. John Adams called it something like the massacre on King Street, but it becomes known as the Boston Massacre. So that painting, which is like a lithograph, is reprinted all over the colonies, right? And they're telling what's going on in Boston and how the British troops have opened fire on innocent civilians and so forth, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So they want to hang these guys, these soldiers, right? But this is under the British Constitution. These soldiers have due process. Yes. They get a trial. Now they're going to hold that trial in Boston, where they're hated. You understand? So, trying to find somebody to defend these soldiers, I know you do. There's a lawyer in Boston that really doesn't want to do this, but feels like nobody else will really do it, so he's going to do it. Because he believes in the law. And that's John Adams, right? So John Adams is going to represent these soldiers. Okay, when I show you the John Adams video later this week or next week, you'll get to see a reenactment of the trial, which is fantastic. Okay, and in the end, they will be found not guilty of murder. There are some minor charges against the soldiers, but they will not be hung. Excuse me, they will not be hanged. Okay. Now, this is obviously comes at a cost, okay, to John Adams. But listen, the king and the governor of Massachusetts, which is now becoming a royal colony because of all the rebellion going on there, take note of John Adams. And they're like, this guy is a good one. Let's get him on our side. So the king, or at least, the people that represent the king, want John Adams to come to work for them. And the Sons of Liberty, they want John Adams to come work for them. He's torn. Okay? But in 1773, Cousin Sam and his good buddy, John Hancock. Okay? Now, when we talk about Sons of Liberty, okay, Hancock is the money behind it. Sam Adams is like the community coordinator. Okay? He's the guy that's getting people riled up, bringing people together. He's the organizer. Okay? This is an odd friendship. Hancock is one of the wealthiest men in New England. Okay? Sam Adams hangs out in the tavern. Okay? Kind of the underworld of Boston. Okay, so they're an odd couple. But they both use each other to achieve the same goals, which is to get rid of the British. Okay? Now, from there, in 1773, a protest takes place, an illegal protest called the Boston Tea Party. Okay? And this is response to the British really clamping down on smuggling. Hancock owned like 12 ships. And he was well known to be smuggling in things that the British didn't want them to import. They wanted them to import stuff from Britain, not from other places. Hancock was flouting those rules. And so they started searching ships with no warrants and so forth. You follow me? And so Hancock says, and one of the things I'm going to show you in here is British tax collector is going to get tarred and feathered. You guys remember learning about tar and feather? I'm going to show you this. They do it I mean, it's like, it looks real. It's like Hollywood, okay? I mean, it's brutal. I mean, a lot of people would die from it, you understand? This is hot tar on your skin, okay? The feather was just to add insult, okay? Now, a bunch of these guys are probably sitting around drinking at the tavern, and somebody says, you know, let's get back at the British. There's a freaking ship with all this British tea on it. They're drunk. They dress up like Indians, Mohawk Indians, and in the dark of night, they go and throw over 300 chests of tea worth thousands and thousands of dollars into the British harbor. Okay? It was an expensive protest. This is when the British are really going to clamp down. Okay, in 1774, they're going to pass what are called the coercive acts, which we do not like. In fact, we feel they are quite. Thank you for finishing my sentences, Lily. They are quite intolerable. We will refer to these as the intolerable acts. The British coercive, we intolerable. Okay? Now, guys, these acts are really going to strike at the heart of some of the rights that we found yesterday. Okay, like quartering soldiers in people's homes. Kicking people out of their own homes to house the British soldiers there. They're going to send 20,000 troops. They're going to occupy Boston. Well, those troops got to have somewhere to stay. Okay, so basically Boston is under siege. They're going to shut down the harbor. Now, that's going to hurt the middleman. That's going to hit the little guy. Okay, that's making a living off these goods that are coming into the harbor and so forth, or leaving the harbor. It's shut down. Commerce is done. This is going to anger a lot of people. Yes? So illegal searches. And here's a big one. This is the one that really turns John Adams. It says, if a British subject is charged with a capital crime in the colonies, they will be sent back to England for trial. Now, John Adams got these soldiers off just 3 years earlier, 4 years earlier, in the Boston Massacre. They got a trial. The jury was made up of Massachusetts men, Boston men, and they were acquitted. But now that trial would take place in London. Follow me? And so John Adams, that was always for the law, is going to join the cause of his cousin and join the Sons of Liberty. Yes?
Do we need to know what was in it?
You might want to mention, like, one or two things that, you know, that kind of clamp down. You're going to be pressed for time, so you got to pick and choose what you feel is most important. How do we get out of here? I got it. 20? 20. Well, let's keep going. All right. So, need to erase some stuff. Make some room. So, 1774. Leaders of the different colonies call for the first Continental Congress. And where are they gonna meet? Philly. Now, this is in response to the Intolerable Acts, okay? Now, 12 of the 13 colonies will be represented, minus Georgia. Georgia is the only one that doesn't send any delegates, okay? They meet in Philadelphia and they talk. As Adams would say, they would talk, they would talk, they would talk, but nothing would be done, okay? But they did make plans to, you know, organize some boycotts about the British, okay? And send letters to the king and so forth, okay? And they agreed that if things...
Excuse me, can you please have Ruby Cervantes to the main office?
Okay.
Thank you.
They agreed to meet again if necessary, okay? Well, it's going to become necessary. Okay, remember, Boston is under siege. You've got 20,000 British troops stationed in Boston. And who are the troublemakers in Boston? These cats right here. And the British want them. Okay? Now, on April 19th, 1775, okay, so the Continental Congress was 1774. Okay, April 19, 1775, General Gates is sent out to Lexington and Concord to look for these two men and to seize what? What were they looking for besides these two guys? Yeah, weapons. They had an arsenal of weapons and munitions and powder out in Lexington and Concord. And as Gates and his men started marching out to Lexington and Concord, about 10 miles outside of Boston, they were met on the road. By who? Militia. Or at the time they were called the Minutemen. Okay? They will be met on the road. Because when you talk about this, I mean, if you study military history, the Europeans have always used, up to this point, what are called linear tactics, where you line up on a battlefield across from your enemy. You got one guy on his knee, a guy standing behind him, and a guy behind him. They fire, they retire, reload, the next people step up, fire, they retire, reload, and that's what you're doing. So on a battlefield. And the first group to leave the field loses. Okay? Well, over 150 years, the Americans that live here have been fighting for their very survival against Native American tribes. And do the Native American tribes fight with linear tactics like the Europeans?
No.
No. And so the Americans learned how to fight guerrilla warfare. You know, I know it's not honorable to hide behind a tree. You should stand right in front of your enemy and let him shoot at you. That's the way the British fought. I know it brings dishonor on you to hide behind a tree, but that's what they did. Okay, and the British are wearing red. Right? They stand out. They march in columns. They make a lot of noise. They're not stealth. So Gates and his men are going to be repelled. Yes? This is the start of the American Revolution. Shot heard around the world. Okay? So I think it's a good idea. Maybe we have a second Continental Congress. What do you think? Yeah, we need to talk about this because blood has been shed. Massachusetts blood. So each of the 13 colonies are going to send delegates to the Second Continental Congress. Where are they going to meet? Philadelphia, a place called Carpenter's Hall. This Congress will meet from 1775. I think they started in April 1781. This Congress will be in session. This group of men is what's holding the 13 colonies together. This Congress. Okay? The only thread holding them together. Now it is here that they decide that they need an army. Okay? Now there's a lot of resistance to this, guys. All right? There are many of these delegates at the convention that do not want war with Britain, that want to reconcile with Britain. You understand? So this idea of independence is not spoken out loud really until 1776. I mean, when they get there in 75, it's more about, all right, how are we going to deal with this? The British are occupying Boston. They've attacked us. There's basically a war going on. What are we going to do about it? Okay? And there are many that want to reconcile. And then there are others like John Adams that want to fight. Shortly thereafter will take place the Battle of Bunker Hill, where more Massachusetts blood will be spilled. And John Adams is furious. He wants an army. There's resistance to that. So he's a sly, smart guy. And so he puts the cart before the horse, if you will. He says, we need a commander-in-chief. And there's one guy that's been showing up for this Continental Congress every day, one guy wearing a military uniform. He's from Virginia, and his name is George Washington. Now, has he a stellar military career?
No.
No, he just has a long one. Okay? You know who really wanted to be the commander-in-chief? John Hancock did. He wanted to be the head of the military. So Washington showed up in his uniform, and he's 6'4", where the average American male at the time was 5'7". He's 6'4", okay? So Adams says, and everybody respects Washington. You know, I think most of them all really respect Washington. You know what I mean? If not, they're scared of him, okay? And so when Adams proposes making him commander of the Continental Army, they're making this up as they go along. You understand? This has never been done before. So all these names that they start to come up with, they make them up. The Continental Army is what they're going to call it, and the commander-in-chief is going to be George Washington. Okay, so that's one of the things this Congress does. And in 1776, they will begin drafting a declaration. Now, guys, and in order to do any business in this Congress, okay, if you're going to have a vote, you have to have 9 of the 13 colonies agree. That's like a supermajority, okay? But when they voted on whether to craft a declaration or declare independence from Britain, Hancock, let me tell you this, Hancock is the president of the Second Continental Congress. Okay? Hancock's the one that sits at the head table. Okay? Remember, this guy's he's a troublemaker. He's a rabble-rouser, right? I mean, he's a troublemaker. But when John Adams proposes a Declaration of Independence be drafted, it is Hancock who says this has to be unanimous. You've got to get all 13. Because if we draft a Declaration of Independence and only 9 of them sign on, we begin already divided. You know what I mean? It would be colony against colony, state against state. And so Hancock says, no, this needs to be unanimous. So trying to convince some of these colonies to go along with it was very difficult. And the guy that I think you have to credit with this most of getting it done is John Adams. He's the loudest voice in the room. He's obnoxious and disliked. But Franklin will befriend him, and Franklin will help him convince the others. The key is Virginia and New York. If you can get Virginia, you can get North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. You know what I mean? They'll follow Virginia. You can get New York, then you have one of the wealthiest colonies going along. Okay? And the New Yorkers really love the British. New York Harbor, guys, is one of the most biggest natural harbors in the world. New York City. Okay? So the British are always bringing in their goods. You know, China, dresses, all kinds of things that people would want to buy, especially the rich people. You're like, oh, British ships are coming in today. I wonder what's on board. You know what I mean? So they didn't really want to break with Britain. So convincing New York was very difficult as well. Okay? And so we have a lot of different people to thank for this. People like Richard Henry Lee of Virginia. Okay? And another one named Patrick Henry. Right? You guys all have your books? Okay, check this out. Page 20. Page 23. Okay, you got Paul Revere, right? Right? So that's the myth of the midnight, the poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Okay, you can read about the accuracy or lack of accuracy of that poem. And then go to page 25. Like I said, Virginia was important. Patrick Henry's going to give this speech in front of the Virginia Convention. They're going to send instructions to Richard Henry Lee and to Thomas Jefferson that is there, and to George Washington, who's representing Virginia as well, and tell them whether they're going to vote for independence or not. Henry gives this speech, give me liberty or give me death, and inspires the convention to vote for independence. Okay, so on your essay, you got to throw in Patrick Henry here. Okay, because Virginia is important and he helps turn the tide. Turn the page. Page 27. Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine. Okay, now guys, this thing sells over 150,000 copies. It's not very big. This is the full text of Common Sense. Okay? All right? But it makes the case that this tiny island across an ocean should not be controlling the lives of the men and women of the New World. And it's a common sense argument. And it works. It starts to turn the average American against the British. Now, Thomas Paine liked to think that he was the sole reason for independence. Okay? It went to his head. You understand? Which would cost him later on. What else do I have? We'll talk about Jefferson and the writing of the Declaration tomorrow. And we'll start watching some video. Good? I think we'll have time to start watching video tomorrow and Friday. Good?
Yeah.
All right. So we're wrapping this up. Okay? Peace. Have a good day.